When Sophie first saw him, he was just a dog standing outside the school gate, soaked from the rain, completely still. But then she noticed what he held in his mouth, a bracelet, faded pink beads, one silver charm. The same bracelet her mother had worn before she disappeared. Everyone said it had been lost years ago, but maybe it hadn't. Maybe someone had been waiting for Sophie to find it. Welcome to Saved by Tales. Before we begin this powerful tale of quiet loyalty and family secrets, tell me in the comments, if you had a bracelet or keepsake that reminded you of someone, what would it look like? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button, like and share. There was something Sophie always noticed first about mornings: the sky. At 6 years old, she didn't really have words for it, but she knew it. Some mornings felt blue and sharp, like crisp paper. Others felt gray and soft, like a sweater pulled over your head. That morning was the second kind. A quiet, heavy gray morning with rain sliding down the windows. Sophie pulled on her small rain boots. Her coat zipped up to her chin. Her father tied her hair in 2 loose pigtails, as always. "Ready?" he asked. Sophie just nodded. They walked to school together most days. The school was small, just one long brick building with peeling paint and a rusted gate. Other kids ran and shouted. Sophie usually kept quiet. Her father always told her, "That's all right, kid. You think before you speak. That's a good thing." She didn't know if that was true. Sometimes she just didn't know what to say. It was as they rounded the corner toward the school gate that Sophie saw him, a large shape sitting in the middle of the pavement. At first she thought it was just a shadow, until the shape moved. A dog. Big, dark gray, thick-furred. A German shepherd, soaked through by the rain, but sitting perfectly still, not pacing, not barking, just waiting. Sophie stopped walking. Her father didn't notice at first. Then he turned back and followed her gaze. "That's strange," he said quietly, but he didn't sound scared, just surprised. Sophie watched the dog carefully, and then she saw it, something small, hanging from his mouth. A bracelet, not rope, not string, a real bracelet, made of pale pink beads, and one small silver charm in the center. Sophie's breath caught, because she knew that bracelet. Her mother had worn one just like it, years ago, before she was gone, before anyone talked in hushed voices around Sophie, before the word disappeared became part of Sophie's world. Her hand tightened around her father's coat sleeve. "Dad," she whispered. "That's Mom's." Her father's body went completely still beside her. "Sophie." But when he spoke, his voice was rough, not angry, not scared, just sad. "We don't know that." But Sophie did. She knew it the same way she knew what color the sky was when she woke up. Quiet things, small things, things people forgot to see. The dog didn't move as more kids arrived. Some pointed, some laughed, but no one got close, except Sophie. She stepped forward before her father could stop her. The dog didn't growl, didn't flinch. His amber eyes followed her slowly. When she was close enough, she knelt down in front of him. The bracelet hung from his mouth by a broken thread. Sophie reached out, hands shaking, and gently touched it, and the dog let it go. The bracelet fell into her palm, cold, familiar, real. Her father knelt beside her now, pulling her gently back. "Sophie." But she wasn't really listening anymore. Her mind spun, questions, memories, whispers of things she hadn't thought about in months. That night, Sophie sat in her room with the bracelet on her desk, the beads still damp from the rain, the silver charm shaped like a small heart. Her mother's initials were scratched faintly on the back. E.W. Ellie Wren, her mother's name. Sophie's father didn't say much all evening. He made her dinner, sat quietly by the window, checked on her homework, but the silence felt heavier than usual, like both of them were waiting for something they couldn't quite name. When Sophie went to bed, she slipped the bracelet under her pillow, not because she thought it would disappear, but because she needed to know it would still be there in the morning. The next day the dog was gone, but Sophie knew she had to find him again, because this wasn't just about a bracelet. It was about everything her father wouldn't say. It was about her mother, and it was about the quiet weight she felt in her chest every time she saw the sky turn gray. By the third day, Sophie couldn't wait anymore. The dog hadn't come back to the school gate since that rainy morning, but Sophie couldn't stop thinking about him, or the bracelet. She kept it in her pocket now, running her fingers over the silver heart charm whenever she felt nervous. Saturday morning, as soon as her father left for work at the mechanics, Sophie pulled on her boots, zipped up her jacket, and slipped out the door. She had a plan. The old part of the village sat beyond the train tracks. No one really went there anymore. The tracks were rusty, weeds grew between the stones, and past them, the houses stood quiet, roofs caved in, windows broken. Sophie's grandmother used to say, "That side of town is nothing but ghosts and stories." But Sophie wasn't afraid of stories. She knew this was where she'd seen the dog heading the first day, after school, through the chain-link fence, toward the tracks. By the time she reached the tracks, her heart was beating fast. The village felt far behind her now. The wind picked up little bits of dust and dry leaves. Sophie stood there, watching, listening, and then she saw him, the dog, standing on the other side of the tracks, amber eyes, black and gray fur, waiting. Sophie stepped over the tracks carefully, watching each footstep. She felt like she was crossing into another world. When she got closer, she knelt again. The dog didn't move away. He stood perfectly still, as if he had been waiting just for her. Sophie whispered, "Where did you come from?" The dog turned, slowly, and padded down the path between two broken houses. Without thinking, Sophie followed. The path wound behind the old buildings, through weeds and fallen boards. And then Sophie saw it, a house. It wasn't like the others. The windows weren't all broken. The roof wasn't caved in. It looked forgotten, like someone had just walked away and never come back. The dog sat down in front of the door. Sophie stood beside him, staring up at the house. Something about it felt heavy in her chest, familiar. Her fingers found the bracelet in her pocket, the heart-shaped charm pressed against her palm. Slowly, Sophie stepped up to the door. The handle turned easily. The door swung open with a long creak. Inside, it smelled like dust and rain, and something else, something quieter, memories maybe. The dog followed her in. The house wasn't empty. The furniture was still there, a sofa covered in a sheet, a table with a cracked teacup sitting on it, and on the wall near the stairs, a photograph. Sophie stepped closer, her breath catching. It was her mother, younger, smiling, holding a baby, holding Sophie. Her knees felt wobbly. She pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself. This was her house. This was where she had lived before her mother disappeared, and no one had told her. The dog stood beside her now. His tail brushed gently against her leg. Sophie knelt down beside him, her voice barely a whisper. "Did you bring me here for this?" The dog didn't bark, didn't wag, just sat there, calm and steady, like he understood exactly what she was asking. Sophie spent the rest of the morning exploring the house. She found more things, a small wooden box filled with jewelry, books with her mother's handwriting inside, photographs, and in one of the drawers, folded carefully beneath a scarf, a letter. Her mother's name was on the front. Sophie's fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in her mother's familiar looping handwriting. "For Sophie, if you find this, it means the time has come. There are things I couldn't say before, things I had to keep safe, but now you're old enough to understand. I loved you more than anything. Always, follow the dog. He'll show you the rest." Sophie pressed the letter to her chest. Her eyes stung, but she didn't cry. Not yet. By the time the sun began to set, Sophie knew she had to go home. She knelt beside the dog one more time. "Thank you," she whispered, and for the first time his tail wagged, just once. A slow, steady movement. Then he turned, padding back through the door, and disappearing into the golden light. That night, Sophie hid the letter and bracelet under her pillow. She didn't tell her father yet, but tomorrow she would, because there was more to this story, and she wasn't afraid to find out what it was. By sunrise, Sophie couldn't keep the secret anymore. She waited until her father sat down with his coffee, then climbed onto the chair across from him, the bracelet and letter folded carefully in her pocket. "I have to tell you something," she said. Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. Her father put down his mug slowly. "What is it, Sophie?" Quietly, Sophie pulled out the bracelet and placed it on the table between them. Her father's face changed instantly. His hand froze halfway toward the cup. His voice broke. "Where did you get that?" Sophie looked down at her hands. "There's a dog," she whispered. "A big dog. He gave it to me." And before her father could ask another question, she unfolded the letter. She placed it beside the bracelet, and waited. The kitchen filled with a silence so heavy it felt like rain pressing against a window. Her father picked up the paper with shaking fingers. His eyes moved across the words slowly, once, twice, and then he pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead. "Sophie," he whispered, "I never wanted you to get caught up in this, but it's about Mom, isn't it?" Sophie said softly. Her father nodded. Yes. That afternoon, they went back together, to the house beyond the tracks. Her father stood in the doorway for a long time, one hand on the frame. His face was pale, his mouth tight. "I thought this place was gone," he said quietly. Sophie stood beside him, her hand in his. "It's not," she whispered. "It's still here." They spent hours going through the rooms together. Her father picked up old photographs, smoothed out wrinkled pages. His eyes stayed wet, but he didn't cry. Not once. It was in the back room where they found the box. An old wooden chest tucked beneath a loose floorboard. Her father lifted it gently, his hands shaking just slightly. Inside, they found papers, more letters, photographs, and a map. Sophie leaned in close as her father unfolded it on the table. It was drawn in her mother's careful handwriting. Lines marked in red ink, a forest trail, a stone marker, and at the bottom, written in block letters, "Where I hid everything." Her father's voice dropped to almost nothing. "She must have been protecting something," he said. "I always knew, but I didn't know where." Sophie looked up at him, her heart thudding hard. "We have to follow it," she said. "We have to." That evening, as the sun set behind the rooftops, Sophie stood by the old train tracks again. And there he was, the dog, sitting exactly where she'd first found him, waiting. Sophie knelt beside him, whispering, "We're ready now." And for the first time, the dog stood, turned,
and began to walk. The next morning, Sophie and her father packed sandwiches, a flashlight, and the map. The trail drawn in her mother's handwriting started just beyond the train tracks, cutting through the woods that lined the village's northern edge. Sophie clutched the bracelet in her hand as they walked, the silver heart charm warm against her palm now. And Echo, because Sophie had decided to call him that now, the name from the stories her father once told her, walked steadily ahead, guiding them. The path was quiet. The forest air smelled like wet leaves and cold stone. Light filtered through the trees in golden beams. No one spoke for a long time. It wasn't until they reached the first marker, a stone half buried in moss just as the map showed, that her father spoke. "I used to think this forest was endless," he said quietly. "When your mother and I first moved here." Sophie looked up at him. Did she always have secrets? Her father smiled faintly. Only the important ones. They followed the map past 3 more markers. A fallen tree shaped like a bridge, a rusted fence, an old well covered in ivy, and finally, as the map showed, they reached a clearing. At its center, a single stone slab, weathered, gray, barely taller than Sophie's knee. Her father knelt beside it, brushing away leaves and dirt, and there, carved into the surface, were 3 letters. EWL. Ellie Wren Leland, her mother. Her father's voice caught. "She left this for us," he whispered, and Sophie understood. It wasn't a grave. It wasn't a hiding place for treasure. It was a message, that she had been here, that she had remembered, that she had waited. Echo stood beside the stone now, sitting calmly as he always had. Sophie knelt beside him, resting her hand on his fur. "Thank you," she whispered, and for the first time Echo's tail wagged twice, slow, steady. Later that week, the village gathered again. The story of the bracelet, the map, the house beyond the tracks, it all spread. A plaque was placed beside the library square now, in memory of Ellie Wren Leland, and Echo, the dog who brought her back. Sophie stood with her father, holding his hand as they watched the mayor speak. But Sophie didn't really listen to the words. She was thinking about quieter things, about gray skies, about dogs who waited, about the feeling of a bracelet pressed against her heart. Echo lived with them now. He wasn't as fast as other dogs. He didn't chase balls. He didn't bark when people knocked on the door. But he sat beside Sophie's bed every night, and when she woke in the mornings, the first thing she saw was his amber eyes watching her, calm, steady, waiting. One evening, months later, as the sun set golden behind the trees, Echo lay in the garden beside Sophie. His breathing was slow, slower than usual. Sophie knelt beside him, her small hands smoothing his fur. "You can rest now," she whispered. Echo's eyes closed, and for the first time in years, he didn't need to wait anymore.